Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2 for a look at the Unconventional faction. As usual, this video is supported by the technical bits video for a lot of the how it works details, and some of the weapons and equipment will be familiar if you've watched the guide to the Syrian Mechanized Infantry, because there's some crossover going on there. The Unconventionals split down into two sub-factions: Combatants, who are more lightly armed and wear more civilian clothing, and Fighters, who are more heavily armed and wear lots of black. A quick note here, I am using version 1.0 of Sir Lancelot's excellent Syrian Army realism mod, so some of the Uncon infantry will look a little different from how it does in the base game, but not in a way that makes it less obvious which units are which. The Uncons are unique in Combat Mission in not representing a specific military force or formation. They are generic, non-conventional forces which gives players a lot of freedom in how to interpret them. They could be local militias, angry tribesmen, foreign fighters, terrorists, pretty much anything you like. And an important component in their generic unconventional nature is that while they don't have a lot of different types of units, their basic infantry teams are highly customizable. These teams range from 3 to 5 pixel truppens strong with a few weapons options. We have 3-man rifle teams with ATGMs, 3-man sniper, where one man has an SVD marksman rifle, 4-man LMG, where somebody brings a light machine gun along, then 5-man sniper, which includes an SVD, 5-man LMG, with 2 LMGs now, and finally 5-man RPG. As usual, the small arms are pretty much interchangeable and the same between the different Uncon types, except for the LMGs. The Combatant's LMG is the RPD, and the Fighter LMG is the RPK. This basically makes no difference. Of all of these options, the RPG-7 is the standout choice. It can reach out to 400 meters, be fired indoors, though the pixel truppen won't enjoy the backblast, and the full loadout per team is 6 rockets. The ammunition types carried is where we start to see some divergence between the combatants and the fighters. Combatant teams with full ammo are armed with 4 PG-7V and 2 PG-7VL heat rounds, which are capable of destroying light vehicles and punching through the lighter armoured areas of NATO tanks or degrading external systems. Fighter teams with full ammo have a 50-50 split: 3 tandem heat PG-7VRs and 3 high explosive OG-7Vs. The PG-7VR has much higher armour penetration than the rockets the combatants carry, and because of the tandem heat, it's capable of dealing with explosive reactive armour. This is a much bigger problem for NATO armour than the older rockets. The OG-7V is theoretically more effective against enemy infantry than the standard heat, but I haven't noticed any difference. These teams are organised into groups, which come in a variety of sizes. Fighters have small, medium and large groups, which consist of 2, 3 and 4 teams respectively, commanded by a HQ team. The combatants have the same, as well as huge groups with 5 teams and tiny groups, which consist of a single team without any HQ. For what it's worth, the actual HQ teams for both combatants and fighters can consist of 1, 2 or 3 men, all armed with ATGMs. The other thing to point out about the Uncons here is that they are extremely poorly equipped. To get across exactly how poorly, we can compare the weapons and equipment that a 5-man US fire team has to a 5-man fighter team. The Americans have 4 assault rifles, an underbarrel grenade launcher and a light machine gun, with a total of 1,000 rounds of ammunition, 36 grenades for the launcher, 14 hand grenades, a one-shot disposable AT weapon, 2 sets of binoculars, and enough body armor, radios and night vision goggles for everyone. The Uncons have 4 assault rifles with 660 rounds of ammunition, an RPG with 6 rockets and 13 hand grenades. That's it. And that's the Uncons on full supply, which you may or may not get when choosing them in the Quick Battle Selector. On the plus side, this translates into very cheap infantry. Setting everything to regular, a US pixel truppen comes to about 10 points, while an Uncon comes to about 4.5. Though the obvious issue is that the Uncons are cheap because they're nowhere near as capable. These fighter and combatant groups have another handicap, and that's that they are themselves whole formations. Where other factions have extended hierarchies, fire teams, squads, platoons, companies, battalions, the Uncons have teams which are organised into groups, and that's it. They're organised in a very flat way, which means that individual groups simply don't have the same information sharing apparatus that other factions have. Combatants at least have something to offset these issues slightly. They can hide in plain sight by merging into the civilian population. Fighters can't do this, presumably because not everybody looks like they're robbing a bank, but combatants can pull it off to varying degrees depending on the civilian density of the map. As long as they don't do anything overly suspicious, like move too fast, crawl around, or start shooting at people, the other player has a low chance of spotting them until they get extremely close. This ability has a lot of potential. Moving around the map in full view and being able to casually observe the enemy are not trivial advantages, not to mention that, given the right conditions, it is possible to zombie walk right up to enemy positions and open up at point blank range, with that 30 seconds of effective fire before it all goes wrong. But that's it for the Uncon fighter and combatant groups. Also in the roster are command groups, spy groups, technical groups, transport groups, VBIEDs, and various kinds of IED groups. The command groups are best thought of as the equivalent to the weapons or support platoons of the conventional factions. They're basically a grab bag of small teams with heavier or specialist weapons. There are some significant differences between the combatants and fighters here, but they both get smaller and larger command groups. The small combatant command consists of a customizable HQ team of 1 to 3 men, 3 snipers with SVDs working as individuals, and 2 two-man RPG teams. The large combatant command is very much the same, a customizable HQ team, 2 PKs, 5 snipers, and 5 RPG teams. This is the combatants to a T, cheap, unsophisticated, and expendable, nothing fancy going on here. The fighters have some more capable equipment. In the smaller fighter command we have a customizable HQ, a PK team, and 3 two-man sniper teams, which are all pretty much the same as the combatants, but then we have 2 RPG teams which have the option to swap their RPG-7s for RPG-29s. The RPG-29 is a more modern RPG which fires either PG-29V 105mm tandem heat warheads, which are effective against pretty much everything up to MBTs, including targets with explosive reactive armor, and TBG-29V thermobaric rockets, which work by creating a significant blast effect and are most effective against infantry in enclosed spaces. The small fighter command also has an ATGM team, armed with a choice of AT-3B, AT-3D, AT-4C, and AT-14 launchers. Broadly speaking, the higher the number and the higher the letter, the better these ATGMs are. The AT-3B is an early MACLOS weapon, the others are SACLOS. By far the most modern and the most dangerous for NATO armour is the AT-14, which can reliably smack around Abrams and Challenger 2s. Next up we have an 82mm mortar that thinks it's a Segway. In Uncon hands these weapons are of questionable value. Not only do they have a very limited supply of ammunition, 14 high explosive and 4 smoke bombs, but because they don't have radios, they either have to be sitting right next to their spotter, or they have to be aiming for themselves and engaging in direct fire. The mortar bombs themselves are effective enough, the tough part is actually getting them to fall where you want. Finally, the smaller fighter command also has a fighter with an SA-16 or SA-18 Igla shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile. These are single-shot weapons which are unlikely to hit any NATO aircraft, but it's not impossible, and pilots seeing a few missiles heading their way might end up moving to evade rather than engage. The large fighter command has a lot of the same equipment, there's just more of it. 2 PK teams, 5 sniper teams, 5 RPG teams, 2 ATGM teams, and a medium mortar. But there are a couple of differences. The Igla team is missing, and a DShK heavy machine gun team and a Recoilless rifle team have been added in. The DShK is a 12.7mm machine gun, roughly comparable to the American M250 caliber. It has a range of about 2,000 meters, though, as usual, good luck actually spotting targets at that kind of distance, and at closer ranges it is capable of penetrating the armour of some NATO light vehicles and degrading the external systems on NATO tanks. The recoilless rifle is the SBG-9, which fires rocket-assisted 73mm HE and high-explosive anti-tank rounds. These rounds are kicked out of the barrel by a small charge, then the rocket motor ignites and accelerates it away towards the target. In combat mission at least, it's best thought of as a kind of tripod-mounted super RPG. The SBG-9 can fire out to about 1300 meters and is reasonably accurate. It's directly related to the 73mm gun mounted on the BMP-1 and fires the same ammunition. OG-9V high explosive rounds, PG-9 high explosive anti-tank rounds, and PG-9 VNT tandem heat rounds. The SBG is capable of doing significant damage to light vehicles and putting small holes in some NATO main battle tanks, but it also has significant backblast and is generally inferior to the AT-14 in every way except in projectile travel time and the amount of ammunition carried. Next up for the Uncons we have the vehicle groups, technicals and transports. The technicals are pickups mounting heavy weapons. The group consists of 4 armed with PK machine guns, including a HQ vehicle, 2 with DShK HMGs, and 2 with SPG-9s, which we've already covered. The fighters also have access to a heavy technical group, which is made up of 3 pickups carrying ZSU-23-2 AA guns. These are the same AA pickups as used by the Syrian mechanized infantry formations, which probably says more about the state of the Syrian army and Shock Force than it does about the Uncons, and they're capable of destroying infantry and light vehicles as well as being able to degrade the systems on MBTs. The technicals are all very fast, especially on road, and have a single spare seat, which means that you can use them to transport some of the Uncon's single pixel trooper units around, like snipers, spies, and IED triggermen, and they are not entirely incapable of dishing out some punishment in favourable circumstances. They are, however, extremely vulnerable to any kind of enemy attention, being repurposed unarmoured civilian vehicles, and with the important exception of the SPG-9 technical, they don't carry a large amount of ammunition. 500 rounds for the PKs, 300 for the DShK, and 600 rounds for the 23mm cannons. The SPG-9 carries 15 heat rounds, which is a bit more respectable, but given the fragility of the technical as a weapons platform, the chances of the SPG-9 techie actually surviving long enough to fire off all those rounds is pretty questionable. To cap it all off, like almost all of the Uncon units, the technicals also lack any kind of radios, so communications consists of shouting and unpleasant hand gestures. The transport groups also consist of 8 vehicles, including a HQ, 4 taxis and 4 pickups. The taxis can carry 4 men in addition to the driver, and the pickups can carry a more useful 9 extra pixel trooper. It is possible for the passengers in the back of the pickups to use their weapons, except for the RPG, though they are horrifically vulnerable while they do so, and they're not really likely to hit anything. That's it for the less specialised core of the Uncon lineup. Fighter or combatant groups as infantry, command groups for the heavy weapons, technical groups as light vehicle support, and transport groups for transport. The remaining entries on the Uncon list are very different. They are the spies and IEDs. Spies are pretty straightforward. They are single unarmed pixel trooper in civilian clothing that the player can use to observe the enemy without much risk of getting spotted. The spies can't directly influence the battlefield, and because they have no radios, they are difficult to work into the Uncon's already atrocious C2, but as eyeballs on legs, they are an important asset to the semi-omniscient human player. They are difficult for the enemy to spot because of their tiny unit size and because they benefit from the civilian density settings, allowing them to get very close to the enemy before being noticed. If they do get noticed, however, they are likely to be either shot or apprehended, in other words arrested or otherwise removed from the game by a giant floating exclamation mark. Spy groups consist of 3 spies, and there is also the slightly more useful but more expensive Spy Forward Observer who has a radio. In the quick battles, these might not be very useful for calling in support like normal forward observers, mainly because the Uncons have no off-map artillery, and their on-map artillery consists of those Segway mortars with barely any ammunition, but there is potential for them to be useful in scenarios featuring hybrid Syrian army unconventional forces. Next up we have the complicated part, the IEDs. The Uncons have 2 types of IED in Shock Force 2, triggered IEDs and vehicle-borne IEDs. Triggered IEDs come in 2 parts, the IED itself and a triggerman. The IED is planted in the deployment phase and can't be moved. The triggerman is a single pixel trooper armed with a Kalashnikov and a detonator. For the IED to go off, the triggerman must be watching the IED within range of the detonation system, and the IED must have been activated. Activating the IED is simple. You select the IED and draw a target line. Targeting the ground will simply activate the IED, and the triggerman will detonate it when he sees an enemy unit get close enough. If you target a specific enemy unit, then the triggerman will try and set the IED off when he sees that unit get close to the IED. There are 3 types of IED that each come in 4 sizes. The 3 types differ as to the chances of the IED malfunctioning, in which case it won't go off at all, and how close the triggerman needs to be to send a signal. Wired IEDs have a 10% failure chance and a 100-meter range. Radio IEDs have a 300-meter range and a 20% failure chance, and cell IEDs have a 600-meter range and a 10% chance of failure. Just to make it more awkward, some NATO vehicles are also equipped with jammers that may also stop the IED from detonating. Finally, the force sizes are small, medium, large, and huge, which are correspondingly more expensive and more effective as they get bigger. IEDs can sympathetically detonate, that is, another nearby explosion can set them off, so incoming artillery fire can pre-detonate them, and if you have the time and points to expend, IEDs can be positioned so as to form daisy chains. This is probably too expensive to actually be useful in a quick battle, but if you really want to engage in some rapid urban remodeling or really scare the hell out of your opponent, then it's a fun option. Finally, VBIEDs, or vehicle-borne IEDs, are comparatively simple. These consist of a civilian car with a driver, a triggerman in the front passenger seat, and a huge IED in the back. They work by driving into an enemy unit, at which point they explode. These are one of the units that is easier to use in real time than in turn-based mode because it doesn't have any specialized AI. The VBIED isn't going to drive into anything on its own initiative, it will only go where it gets told. Obviously in real time you can adjust the bomb's orders on the fly, whereas in the turn-based mode you have to watch it drive harmlessly past the enemy if everything goes wrong. So they can be quite tricky to use, and I'd really recommend going after stationary targets or using them in enclosed areas like narrow streets or causeways. They are just civilian cars, they're not armoured or anything like that, so if the enemy spots them then they're not going to last very long. They may or may not explode when they get taken out, it varies. On the plus side, they are very fast, especially on roads, and they hit very hard. The best way to use them is to minimise their exposure to the enemy and to try and keep the distances they have to rush under fire as short as possible. They do benefit a little from civilian density, though obviously driving at full speed towards the enemy may give the game away. And that is it for the Unconventionals. This is undoubtedly the hardest faction to play as in Shock Force 2 and probably in all of the combat mission games, simply because they don't have the firepower to compete against their likely opponents. Even the Syrian army, which is second bottom in the combat mission Shock Force food chain, has several tremendous advantages over them. The Uncons are an infantry force without armour or artillery support. They are massively handicapped by poor command control and communications and lack almost any kind of cohesion. They will quickly disintegrate under pressure and simply aren't capable of resisting a conventional force. And that all makes sense. War is politics by other means. Conventional forces are very good at destroying enemy forces and seizing ground. That's the way that conventional forces fight to achieve the political goals of the governments that control them. Unconventional forces, which can't compete with the level of violence that conventional forces can project, are obviously going to be more successful if they tackle the same problems with different standards. The fact that the Uncons are organised in a compartmentalised cell-like structure, the fact that they don't have anything in their arsenal with a big logistics footprint, the fact that they resort to IEDs and guerrilla warfare is simply because they are not designed to fight conventionally. They can't effectively compete, they're designed to stay underground, to mount raids, to conduct ambushes, to hit and run. Engaging in a stand-up fight is the worst thing that the Uncons can do. At best, they can hope to give their enemy a bloody nose and slow him down. As such, I wouldn't recommend playing as the unconventional forces in quick battles unless you really want a challenge and you're prepared to lose. The objectives in quick battles, namely taking ground and destroying the enemy, are the tasks that conventional armies are good at and unconventional armies are bad at. Scenarios are a different story because the mission maker can set the objectives to take into account the Uncon's weaknesses, for example penalising the other side for collateral damage or awarding disproportionate points to the Uncons for destroying certain high value units. So that's the entire unconventional faction for Combat Mission Shock Force 2. They are a staple of the campaigns and the scenarios, so you're going to see plenty of them if you play the game at all, and they are the super hardcore options for quick battles if you really want a challenge or you're some kind of masochist. Hope you all enjoyed this one, guys, hope it's useful, and I'll catch you in the next video.